And we'll begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And g'day. So good to see you, as today we look at one of Jesus' truly awesome healings, the incredible healing of the man blind from birth, found in John's Gospel, chapter 9, 1 to 41. And the poor guy is nameless. So rather than call him by his disability, I am going to name him Freddie. Over the many years of my life, I have heard various interpretations of this reading, ranging from explaining how the Pharisees' attacking questions helped Freddie progress in his belief in Jesus, and how encouraging this is for us to know that our faith in Jesus will slowly develop over time, or Freddie's faith being compared to the Pharisees' disbelief, with the pastor giving a warning to not be like the Pharisees, be like Freddie. Or the message has focused on the healing taking place on the Sabbath and how Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, which means we are now able to heal and do good on the Sabbath. Now, none of these interpretations are biblically wrong, but there are other authors whose message is more in line with these interpretations. We need to ask ourselves as we read, why was John really writing his gospel? What did John think was the most important thing for his audience to know? And if you have watched a few of my messages, hopefully you are starting to understand how important it is that we stop seeing a verse or a narrative like today's as a standalone piece of historical fact that John has inserted into his gospel for one or all of the above reasons. Do you know the real reason why John wrote his gospel? In his introduction, John tells his readers that he is setting out to prove how. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. And the original audience reading the introduction immediately knew that John will be using examples from Jesus' life to prove to them beyond a shadow of a doubt how Jesus was with God. Jesus is from God, and Jesus is God. And that is what they read earlier in chapter 5, when Jesus had healed the lame man at the pool. How the Jews didn't like it one bit, that Jesus was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And now John has included a detailed account of this miraculous healing of blind Freddie to yet again give positive proof that Jesus is truly God. Now, you will be pleased to know I won't be breaking down the reading verse by verse, just giving a good overview of the main points that prove John's confidence in his faith that Jesus is God. And before we begin, another thing we need to understand is Freddie's miracle is a true historical account. If the original audience had any doubts about the veracity of the story, they could go and check it out with the first-hand witnesses, Freddie himself or his neighbours. His parents may even have been still alive, and check they would have, for there was no precedent in the Old Testament of healing the blind. There was plenty of healings of other random serious illnesses, and even 2 cases of people being raised from the dead, but no healing of the blind, which explains the neighbours' comments concerning their serious doubts about the evidence before their eyes when their blind from birth neighbour could see. And John starts his narrative with the disciples' seemingly innocent question, showing that despite the narrative of Job being considered the oldest book in the Bible, They hadn't learnt the book's lesson about God when they asked Jesus, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, hopefully you have heard about Job, or even better, read about him in his book, and know that God had informed Satan how "there is no one like my servant Job, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and shuns evil." Yep, Job had done nothing to deserve the awful events and his terrible illness. It was all a nasty trap that had been set by Satan. And then how, towards the end, from chapter 38 onwards, God answers Job's grievances with heaps of rhetorical questions to enforce how powerful God really is, in that he not only created the world and everything in it, God is in charge and knows what is happening. And then midstream, in chapter 40, God interrupts his interrogation of Job with, "I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself?" And so with the wisdom of hindsight, the Apostle John saw that in their seemingly innocent question, they were just like Job and were condemning God to justify the man's blindness. They knew from Scripture that God is compassion and is mercy. They knew that God had reasons that were way beyond their understanding. They knew they shouldn't be condemning God to make sense of something that didn't make sense or seem fair. And let's not think too harshly of them, for isn't that what we modern people still do? Blame God for someone's terminal illness, accident, misfortune, etc., when the chances are they have come about because the person exercised their free will and made poor choices that have been proven bad for you, that has led to the serious problems they are facing. Can I hear you thinking, "Hey, wait a minute, doesn't God in Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 58 to 61 tell the Israelites that if you do not carefully revere your God's glorious and awesome name by following all the words written in this book, the Lord will send plagues and severe illnesses and every kind of sickness and disaster not recorded in this book of the law"? And yes, you are right. God did give his people this stern warning. But this is like when parents go, "You need to do your homework or chores, and if you don't, then there will be no whatever is suitable consequences for your child." And most parents try hard, really hard, to not have to follow through on their warning. But they also know if they don't, this will lead to further problems of disobedience. And we see the same with our Heavenly Father. Yes, God has given his people a serious consequence warning if they disobey him. And yet further reading of the Bible shows how God has also given them plenty of chances to make the right choice and obey him. And what is interesting, when you look across the Old Testament, you find that there are only 3 times where the healing of a person is described as punishment for their sin. And yes, there were times the whole nation suffered due to an individual's sin. But the moment there was a plea for God to show mercy, he instantly had compassion on the people, and the plague or illness was stopped. All of this gives us another good example of why you cannot take a Bible verse and treat it as a standalone, self-sufficient, all-encompassing biblical viewpoint. And Jesus corrects their misconstrued judgment of God with, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so the work of God might be displayed in his light. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Now, of course, not everyone born blind back then or since have had the joy of Jesus restoring their sight, whereas Freddie was given the privilege of being one of the people who would prove that Jesus is doing the work of God. And if you notice the plural, we must do the work, this is not referring to Jesus' disciples. The we is Jesus and God working together with the Holy Spirit to demonstrate that Jesus, in displaying God's power and love, and as such is one with God. And the people of Jesus' day would have got this picture, for they knew how Psalm 146 verse 8 had declared, among other things, one of the works of God was to give sight to the blind. And as we know, just one verse isn't enough to justify a position on God's works. And so we find God had the prophet Isaiah proclaim 4 times, which chapter 35 verses 4 to 5 sums up all the other verses nicely with, your God will come. He will come to save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened. And if that wasn't enough to convince them that Jesus was God, John finishes verse 4 and 5 with this cryptic statement. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now the people hearing Jesus' statement could take it to be stating the obvious, for in those days no one, other than thieves and other ungodly people, worked during the night. Or they could see a deeper meaning and wonder whether Jesus is claiming to be the light God created on the first day. And if this is so, then it made sense why John, who had heard Jesus say this, in his introduction had mentioned how in him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. John is making it clear to his audience that even before Jesus had performed the miracle healing, Jesus was claiming he was God. And then it gets interesting, for Jesus doesn't pray to God to heal Freddie. He doesn't command the eyes to see like he commanded the lame man to take up his mat and walk. No, Jesus just puts mud on the man's eyes and tells him to go and wash the mud off. No spectacular, miraculous, instant healing display. Nothing to really demonstrate to those watching that he and God are one, like he had just claimed. Well, until later, when Freddie comes back seeing, confusing everyone who knew him. And so, as the law commanded a person to be presented to the priest to declare the person healed, the man's friends brought Freddie to the Pharisees. Now, I know the Pharisees cop a lot of flack, and rightly so at times, but can you blame them for not believing Freddie had been born blind and could now see? And their disbelief was evident when some of them protested, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Others asked, "How can a sinner do such miraculous signs?" So they were divided. And if you know the full story of the mat man, you know that after his healing, Jesus was being persecuted for healing on the Sabbath. And Jesus had replied, telling them how my Father is always working, and I too am working. And they wanted to kill Jesus, for he was calling God his own Father and making himself equal with God. And now, once again, with Freddie's healing, Jesus is claiming one with God, through his words and this incredible miracle. And still, the majority could not accept the evidence before their eyes that proved Jesus was telling the truth. And so they sought verification from Freddie's parents that this wasn't some con job from some nutcase claiming to be from God. And of course, his parents confirmed that Freddie had been born blind. And not wanting trouble or to be kicked out of the synagogue, they denied knowing what happened. And after more interrogation of Freddie, they, as God's representatives, certainly weren't imaging God, as they hurled insults at him, saying, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." And it is rather ironic how they claim they know that God spoke to Moses. For in Exodus chapter 4, what did God say to Moses as part of the burning bush narrative? God replies to Moses' objection to leading Israel out of Egypt with this rhetorical question: who gives a person sight or makes people blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Yes, the Pharisees knew their scripture inside out. They knew God had promised the blind would see. They could literally see the truth standing in front of them, how blind Freddie could now see. But in their zealous desire to achieve righteousness with God through obeying the letter of the law, they had so twisted and warped God's original intent in the law to image God's love and compassion that they no longer really knew God and his word, even when blind Freddie responded to their insults with, "Now, isn't that remarkable? You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes." We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Needless to say, they didn't like a lecture from a beggar and kicked Freddie out. Again, God's representatives were not imaging God. In comparison, the person they claimed to be a sinner, Jesus, when he heard this, Jesus imaged God by searching for Freddie. And when he found him, Jesus opened the conversation with, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Freddie asked, "Who is he? Tell me that I may believe in him." Jesus answered, "You have now seen him, and he is speaking to you." Freddie responded, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped Jesus. And now blind Freddie was not only healed in his physical sight, but his spiritual sight was able to see that this human man standing before him was in fact the fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 42 verses 5 to 7, where God had said, "I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will hold your hand. I will keep you and make you to be a covenant for the people and a light to the nations, to open blind eyes." Blind Freddie could see clearly now in his heart's mind that Jesus is who he says he is. Not only the Son of God, but he is God. For no one else other than God could make a blind man see. And Jesus never wanted to miss an opportunity to help the people who were still struggling to understand this concept of Jesus being one with God. Responds in verse 39 with, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Now, firstly, we need to realize that our understanding of judgment is not what Jesus means here. He is not talking about judging whether a person is righteous or a sinner. Instead, it is the people themselves who are doing the judging as they decide whether to believe that Jesus was with God, Jesus is from God, and Jesus is God. Being physically blind, like Freddie, is not a handicap to a person's recognizing who Jesus is. For it is a person's spirit who helps them see that Jesus was doing the work of God when he healed blind Freddie. The thing I think we often miss is that Jesus came for the Pharisees too. He wanted them to see that while they knew the law inside out, they didn't really know God, and so they weren't imaging him. Jesus also wanted to open their spiritually blind eyes so they too could see, like blind Freddie and the others who believed after witnessing the miracle, who Jesus really was. And it certainly wasn't a sinner like they had labelled him as earlier. And it must have made Jesus' heart heavy as the Pharisees that heard him responded with, "What? Are you saying we're blind too?" They had got the point that Jesus was saying they were spiritually blind. But they were so deluded by the twisted version of God's word that they had developed in their desire to please God, and so their head knowledge denied the Spirit any chance of opening their eyes to the real truth that was in front of them. They had judged Jesus and decided there was no way, Jose, that he was the Son of God. And Jesus gives them the consequences of their judgment of his Godship, saying, "If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty of sin. But seeing as you claim you can see, you remain guilty." And the sin Jesus is talking about here is the sin of knowing Jesus has done the work of God in his miraculous healing of blind Freddie, giving clear proof that Jesus is from God, and still refusing to believe Jesus is God. And so after reading John's narrative, we should be asking ourselves, what will our spiritual eyes see? How are we going to judge who Jesus is? Do we think Jesus was doing the work of God in healing blind Freddie? And as we open our spiritual eyes to see Jesus was with God, Jesus is from God, and Jesus is God, doesn't that make Jesus even more exciting and powerful and worth imaging God and his Son Jesus in our lives? Amen.